Hey, Tom Rabbit! I hope you got this for your recording. Hey, YouTube out there. Tom Rabbit likes to record these. Hey, Tom Rabbit!
I happen to just wander in. I have no idea what you were talking about or what the conversation is, so I don't want to
We were
derail
just
any.
talking about general. No, you're not derailing it. We're just talking in general about how a lot of atheists on Clubhouse and Discord reason. So why don't you tell us about your atheism?
About my atheism? Well, I'm of the view that there's probably no God. I don't know what more you want to know exactly.
So
but
there's
go ahead.
no God because okay. So God does not exist because.
I think that most conceptions of gods are incoherent, contain contradictions. Independently of that, I think there's insufficient evidence or warrant for believing that a God does exist. And there's just plenty of evidence that a God is the kind of thing that we would make up, because we as a species are very given to inventing all kinds of fantastical creatures of various scope and power, everything from dragons and pixies and elves and Bigfoot and you name it, to witches and all the way up to gods, and including an omni-god.
Okay, so your position is that there are no gods. Okay, so
yeah,
is it your
it's a provisional position? It's a provisional position. It's not something that I think I can demonstrate to be categorically true, but I think it's more likely to be true than not.
Well, one will either affirm or deny all gods, or one will lay out a claim where they are suspending judgment. So do you affirm or deny the existence of God, or do you claim to suspend judgment?
No, I don't suspend judgment. I'm not agnostic. I'm not sort of on the fence and sort of undecided. I think it's very, very likely that there isn't a God, just like I think it's very, very likely that there isn't a Bigfoot. I don't have a demonstration that Bigfoot doesn't exist, but I have what I think to be sufficient warrant for thinking Bigfoot doesn't exist.
There are good reasons to believe Bigfoot doesn't exist.
And yeah, exactly. I think there are good reasons for thinking Bigfoot doesn't exist, which is why I think, but I don't have a demonstration that Bigfoot's an impossibility or something like that.
Okay.
So in other words, I can deny. Just let me clarify here. I can deny the existence of something. I can affirm that something doesn't exist without knowing to a moral certainty that it's impossible or anything like that.
Okay. So you affirm that there is no God. So
right.
On what rational grounds can you assert that what is fundamental to everything is not an eternal mind that we call God? Okay. So how would you rationally justify that?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
What would be the justification to assert that what is fundamental to everything is not an eternal mind that we call God?
I just don't think that there's any reason to think that a mind is necessary and fundamental to the existence of anything else.
Okay, so the not God world is, from your point of view, the not God world is invoked to be true solely on the grounds that you're unconvinced of the God world?
No, it's just that I don't think it more probable that I don't think it's more probable that we would find the world that we do on the hypothesis or on the posit that a God exists. In other words, I don't find it there. I don't find there. I don't. Oh, well, maybe I'm not. So try me again, or maybe reformulate the question.
You're affirming the not God world as opposed to the God world. Okay, so giving me a probabilistic assessment is not a logical necessity, right?
No, it's not. I started out by saying that my atheism is provisional. It's not. It's just as a believer can believe. No, you're asking me questions. Allow me to flesh out the answers, please.
I'm listening.
Okay, so just as a believer can believe that a God exists on the balance of evidence without thinking that they have a conclusive demonstration or proof of the existence of God, a person can believe that a God doesn't exist on the balance of the reasons without having a demonstration of the impossibility of a God. And that's my position. I don't think God's an impossibility. Some conceptions of God are self-contradictory. Those I think can be ruled out, but not every conception of a deity. Right, like a deistic God, for instance, isn't incoherent.
So the concept of a self-contained non-contingent, absolute creator God, his existence would not be contingent or probabilistic. So it would do you no good to say he probably doesn't exist. But your
Well, if it
position
was
is
necessary, if it was necessary, then of course it would be necessary.
So your position is no God exists.
My position is no God exists. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So giving me probabilistic reason doesn't get you to a necessary conclusion that there's no God.
It's not a necessary conclusion. I keep repeating it. It's not a necessary conclusion. It's not a necessity. It's not a necessity that there's no God. I think on the balance of the reasons, I think there's better reason to think that there isn't a God.
Is the not God world true?
Yeah, I think it's the case that there isn't a God. Just like I think it's the case that there isn't a Bigfoot, but I don't have a proof. I don't have a proof that Bigfoot is impossible. I have reasons to think that Bigfoot doesn't exist and is an invention and merely imaginary.
Okay. So your reason. Okay. So we have good reasons to believe Bigfoot doesn't exist. We have good reasons to believe that Santa Claus doesn't exist. What is your good reason that there is no eternal creator God?
It's exactly the same, formally the same kind of reason that we think that Bigfoot and Santa doesn't exist. It smacks of human invention and confabulation. What there is a lot of claims about God's nature and attributes, all of which are stipulated to exist, none of which can be demonstrated to exist.
We're just talking
there's a striking absence of evidence where one should expect to find it. Unless you imagine some rarefied God, like a deistic God that you wouldn't expect to have evidence for.
Okay,
in which
so
case,
your position is there's no evidence for God. Now,
well, that's part of the argument. Part of the argument is that
I want to focus on one issue at a time, okay, rather than a multiplicity of things, like we're juggling. Okay, so you're affirming necessarily that God does not exist, correct?
No, not necessarily that God doesn't exist. That is not my position.
Okay,
it is not necessarily the case that God doesn't exist. I just think it is contingently the case that there isn't a God, right? That is to say, it's an epistemic
God by
contingency.
wouldn't be contingent. God by definition, if we're going
to ontologically, God would be necessary.
Have a conversation here instead of you over talking me.
Well, no, you're putting words in my mouth. That's why.
Okay.
So when you put words in my mouth, I'm going to disabuse you of that.
Okay, right. Well, I appreciate that, but you've been over talking quite a bit. So your position, you're affirming that God does not exist. Okay.
Right.
So just in simple terms, instead of giving me a long prose, I just want a simple answer in 1 or 2 sentences. God does not exist because
there is no evidence that a God exists. There are internal contradictions.
Okay.
In some conceptions of God, and you wanted 1 or 2 sentences. I'm trying to give you 1 or 2 sentences, right? But you have to allow me to get those out.
Okay. Listen, I want to deal with one thing at a time instead of you launching off into a monologue with multiple bullet points. I want to deal with one thing at a time. So
I can enumerate them, and then we can deal with them one at a time.
Can you not overtalk me when I'm speaking, please?
No. You don't get to dictate the terms. If you don't like the terms of this discussion, you can boot me out. I don't care.
I'm asking you not to be rude and overtalk me. Okay? Is that asking you too much?
No, it's not. But you don't get to dictate the terms of a conversation in a conversation. Now, if you want to treat this like...
I'm just simply pointing out that I want you to make one point at a time rather than you laying out multiple bullet points. I want to deal with...
There were only going to be 3. There were only going to be 3.
Okay. Now, your position will go 1 bullet point at a time. All right. Is that acceptable to you to go 1 point at a time?
We can go one at a time, sure.
Is that acceptable to you?
Yeah, all right, let's go with that.
Okay. Your position is that there is no God because there's no evidence for God. Is that your position?
That's part of the position. That's point 1 of 3, yeah.
Okay. Now, so your position is that all the facts that you're acquainted with do not stand in causal relations to and from God. Is that correct?
I'm not sure what that means. That location.
Okay, when you say there's no evidence for God,
relation.
When you say there's no evidence for God, have you determined that all facts that you're acquainted with can and do not stand in causal relations to God, or are you just saying the facts are indeterminate?
No, I'm saying that there is no evidence that any facts in existence stem from the existence of this hypothetical God.
Okay, I don't think you're understanding the question. when you tell me that there's no evidence for God,
Mm-hmm.
it's either going to refer to just basically two things. Either you're telling me that all the facts that you're acquainted with cannot and do not stand in causal relations to God. Do you mean that?
I'm not sure what you mean stand in causal relation. If you mean none of the facts in existence appear to be caused by the existence of a God, yes, that's correct. I don't think
Okay,
any known fact issues from this hypothetical God.
Okay, so how did you determine that any of the facts that you are acquainted with do not stand in causal relations?
Because God is not an explanatory hypothesis. It's vacuous. It's explanatorily vacuous.
No, it's not vacuous. We're talking about the ground of all being. Okay, would it be vacuous
Yeah,
to say that?
I don't think invoking the concept of ground of all being is explanatory. It is
Okay, so
stipulative. It is not explanatory.
do you believe that there is something that is primary from which secondary states arise?
You mean ultimately primary? I don't know. That might be the case.
Okay, all right. So, if somebody were to affirm that there is something metaphysically primary out of which all contingent things arise, would that be a vacuous belief?
No, that wouldn't be vacuous. No.
Okay, so when we posit God as that primary thing,
Mm-hmm.
the only thing that would be different there is that God being primary would be a mind. So the fact that we stipulate an additional attribute, therefore positing God as the ground of all being or being primary to all secondary states, then according to your standard, it wouldn't be vacuous.
No, it would be vacuous
Now,
because invoking a mind doesn't explain any physical facts that way, except when you're talking
no,
about minds that are
it
physically
explains the
embodied.
origin. It explains the origin of something. Okay,
Well,
there's nothing
no, it doesn't.
vacuous about it.
It is stated.
There's
It is
nothing
claimed to
vacuous.
explain, but it doesn't, in fact, explain.
No, okay. Well, you say it doesn't explain. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Now, I'm happy to elaborate on why that would be the case.
Okay. So saying that what is metaphysically primary is a mind is vacuous, but if we said what is metaphysically primary is not a mind, that would not be vacuous.
That too would be completely empty.
Oh, okay. So somebody
In other words, to say that there isn't a God isn't to offer an explanation.
Of course it
Neither
is.
is an explanation. One doesn't purport to be an explanation. The other purports to be an explanation, but is vacuous.
Yeah, no, offering that there is something that is metaphysically first or primary to account for secondary states is not vacuous, is it?
That's not vacuous. That's not what I'm saying is vacuous.
Okay,
What I'm
so
saying is
we're
vacuous is the
positing-
claim that some disembodied mind explains the physical world. That I take to be vacuous.
Why is it vacuous?
It's vacuous because we don't know what it means to say that a mind can bring, for instance, something into existence. For instance, when the Bible says that God spake and brought things into existence, such as light, by saying, "Let there be light," that is not an explanation. That is a stipulation that God did X and
Of
then
course, it's an explanation.
Y
So when you
happened,
say an
but that's not an
explanation, do you
explanation.
mean? Of course, it's an explanation. Okay, but the point is an explanation that you don't like. We don't have
If
to have.
if we said God farted,
Listen to me. I've been very patient with you. You've been very rude much of the time. Okay. I have tried to control my tongue, and I don't appreciate you constantly being rude and over talking. Okay? Would you please stop that? Okay? Now, saying it's vacuous, simply adding, is it? Let me get this really clear. Is somebody invoking that something is metaphysically first and primary as an explanation of why there are contingent things? Is that vacuous? You have to unmute your mic. Ozzy, you have to unmute your mic. Ozzy, in the lower right-hand corner, you have to unmute your mic.
Yeah, I'm not going to put up with this being muted this way. Conversations should be able to admit
You were
people
muted
talking
because
over each other.
you were being muted. You got muted. I didn't mute you. One of the other moderators did. You were
Well, that's
muted
okay.
because
I'm not putting up
hey,
with that. I'm not
okay,
putting up with that nonsense.
please don't overtalk. Well, listen, you have been very rude. I've been trying to
Mm-hmm.
be very polite and cordial with you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I understand that there's always going to be some crosstalk, right? Now, when you
Yep.
ask me not to overtalk you, I immediately shut my mouth. But
No, no,
you've been
no.
persistent. Okay, would you please not
When you
overtalk
ask
me while I'm
me a
speaking?
question, you
Would
have
you
to wait for
please
the
stop?
answer. When
Listen to
you
me carefully. Would
mischaracterize
you
my
listen to
position,
me?
you're going to get interrupted.
We're gonna mute you again if you're gonna be
Yeah.
obnoxious.
Well, you mute
Now
me again and I'm
I'm
gone.
expecting
Mute
more.
me again and I'm
Good.
gone.
You're gonna get muted if you misbehave and you overtalk again. Okay.
I
Now,
will
if you
overtalk you every time you
no, you
mischaracterize my
won't,
position.
or you'll be muted
Every
and
time,
I
Darth.
yell it out of
Every
here.
time.
Okay, listen
Every
to me
time.
carefully. Listen, you need to be more better behaved. If you're an intellectual, as you present yourself to be,
I'm not
on
an
these
intellectual. I
topics,
don't purport to be an intellectual. I'm just an
I didn't
ordinary guy.
claim, I'm not claiming, listen, I'm not claiming that you're claiming that with capital letters, but you present yourself as somebody who's educated with a master's degree in philosophy commenting on these issues. Now, I'm going to ask you again.
That is not how I
Do not
present
please.
myself.
Okay, listen. All right, listen. I'm going to ask you one more time. All right. Now, if you want to persist in being obnoxious and rude, you can wait till I'm done to correct anything that you think I say is incorrect. But
Darth,
if you persist, okay,
if you were a
goodbye.
person of goodwill and conversation,
Goodbye. Okay. All right.
What a
So
shame.
here again, we have another atheist being a complete troll in the conversation. Okay, because he doesn't want to have an adult interaction back to back. He's pulling the old atheist tactic of being rude and obnoxious. I perfectly understand that you may want to accuse me of, quote, misrepresenting you or not citing you properly, but you don't have to machine gun overtalk me every time I'm speaking. Okay? So, this is a guy that a lot of atheists look up to. He presents himself as more being philosophically oriented, and his conduct here this evening was as bad as the obnoxious teenagers that we run into who are atheists on Discord. So, I'm sorry that occurred, but he was asked many times to stop being rude and being obnoxious. And he decided that he wanted to get kicked, that he was going to continue to be rude and obnoxious. Okay.
Now, what's sad here is that he did state issues that he saw, right? Incoherence, contradictions, no warrant, basically some type of inductive or abductive case that everything's just made up, which could have been interesting to explore. But yeah,
Yes.
it's just
Well, you
sad.
see, what he's simply trying to do is debate by aggressiveness and obnoxiousness, and just by a fiat claim. So what he says is that God being a mind is a vacuous explanation. Well, says who? And he goes, well, because it doesn't explain anything. Well, but then he turned around and he said, somebody invoking that what is metaphysically primary is not a mind, is the ground of all being. He said, well, that's not vacuous. So if we say that the what is metaphysically primary is personal or a mind, well, that's vacuous. But if it's impersonal, it's not vacuous. You see his double standard? Okay. Now, but then I think he was talking out of both sides of his mouth if we go back to the recording. Because if he says that what is metaphysically primary without a mind or not personal is vacuous, then he has no ground of being to speak of. So his whole philosophical world crumbles because whatever he invokes in terms of contingency doesn't come from anywhere. Right? So notice what he said, that he wanted to eliminate vacuous concepts. Are we all clear on that? That he was opposed to vacuous concepts? Right?
Sure.
But then he said, and somebody can correct me if I'm mistaken, that he said both offering a metaphysically primary impersonal source or ground of all being and a metaphysically primary personal source would both be vacuous. Well, then that means that there's no identifiable ground of all being from which all secondary or contingent states derive and depend. Therefore, whatever he asserts is, can be, or cannot be, by his own standard would be vacuous, because it doesn't offer an explanation as to why anything is. I wish I could have, if he had not been so rude and obnoxious, he could have remained in the room, but then I would have showed him how he has a double standard, because then I can ask him, when he invokes any instance of what is, can be, and cannot be, what is it fundamentally and foundationally that would dictate what is, can be, and cannot be? Well, for him, he cannot answer that question. He made it very clear that offering something that is metaphysically primary, that is impersonal or impersonal, would be vacuous and untenable. Therefore, he admitted indirectly and implicitly, without realizing it, that therefore whatever concepts that he invokes that are not vacuous, that are meaningful, don't derive from anything identifiable or defensible that's fundamental. So by his own standards, rationales for things ultimately are vacuous because they have no explanatory power. Right? Remember how he said God offers no explanatory power? Well, what is it that's fundamental that gives explanatory power as to why anything is fundamentally what it is, can be, and cannot be? Well, the answer for him is there is nothing identifiable. So you see, he shot himself in his own foot. And I have a strong suspicion that he decided to be obnoxious and belligerent because if he remained cordial, the vacuousness of his rationale was going to fail. Notice at first he tried to say that his invocation that God doesn't exist is probabilistic, right? And I showed him how fallacious that was. Okay, either God is or is not. Either you're affirming God or you're not affirming God, or you're claiming to suspend judgment, right? So even someone like him who claims, and I don't doubt it, that he has a master's degree in analytic philosophy, resorts to the old tired and worn out tactics of being rude and obnoxious in order to evade their position to be questioned. Notice how he was machine gun talking with the bullet points, and he was very reluctant and reticent to go through each one as a bullet point. And then he started to get obnoxious and telling me that I wasn't dictating the terms of the conversation, when all I wanted to slow down and go through each bullet point at a time. So, I mean, what an embarrassment for this guy who puts himself forward as being, philosophically understood. Anyway, welcome to the room, Sam. Go ahead. Did you catch that, Tom Rabbit? Hope you upload that to YouTube.